So, you all came to a Beyond Limits event. Is it possible that you might have issues with authority? If that's the case, you're in very good company, because that's what this talk is about. Basically, we're talking about when it is that you had a situation where authority figure, an expert, a doctor, a lawyer, your mechanic, your dentist, gave you a piece of information, and something didn't ring true for you. The little voice in your head spoke up and said, I'm not sure if this is actually right. And if that's the case, what do? Do you challenge that? Do you question authority becomes the question. And we can't question every time, can we? Because that's exhausting. When do you choose? When do you choose to question that authority? For us, this is a case study about when that little voice ignited a big idea, a big dream for us, and it allowed us to do what they said was impossible and actually make it possible. The story starts when my son was born, and our little house could no longer accommodate 3 people and 2 offices. We had to think about a renovation. And as many of you know, the thought of renovation brings up big dollar signs, very expensive, and the horror of the contractors. But nonetheless, our main focus was our son Carter and his health and his happiness and his safety. So when we noticed as new parents this black soot on the windowsill of his room, we were concerned about what it is that he was breathing. What I did was I contacted the Air Quality Management District, and I asked them, what is this black stuff? They came out, they put a little test plate out, and they told me it's burnt carbon. So I said, what does that mean? They said, it causes heart disease, lung disease, and cancer. Guess who the culprit was who was doing this to my son? It was me. It was my hot water heater, my furnace, my appliances, my fireplace, my car, and everyone else's. Monica and I also spent 2 years working and traveling in over 40 countries, and we came to understand things that broadened our perspectives, and we saw societies that did things that we thought were impossible. And so we thought about that concept, and we had an idea. Could we actually take those concepts from our travels and incorporate them into the ideas that we had for our renovation project? Could we combine the travel experiences that we had along with the standard construction and the off-the-shelf technology? So we didn't want to do anything fancy, but we wanted to see if we could actually get this done in a reasonable way. We knew if we could do that, we could actually reduce the health impacts and the construction costs and the ongoing utility bills for our house. So we got excited by the idea, and we went back into our travel journals. We tried to find basically what are the 3 principles that guided these societies that did these things that were really generative. And the first one is very simple: use less materials and create less waste. And an example of that is island cultures. Island cultures have to be that resourceful, right? They have no place to throw things away. Places like Sri Lanka do amazing things with coconuts. They use the milk, they use the meat, they use the shell, and they use the husk over and over and over again. The second principle has to do with working with nature and using less energy. And we saw that very clearly when we went to Mesa Verde. Mesa Verde in Colorado has their main palace in a cave which faces due south. And in the northern hemisphere, if you face a cave due south, what happens is really interesting. The sun rides high in the sky, right, in the summertime, keeping the sun out of the cave and keeping it cool. And in the wintertime, the inverse happens in that the sun rides low in the sky, penetrates deep into the cave, heats all the rocks in that cave, and as a result, those rocks radiate that heat back out at night, keeping that cave nice and warm for free. Those people weren't stupid. They understood something that we might have forgot in our modern society. Because the #1 energy user in any building, heating and cooling. So number 3, they used natural materials that were less toxic. And an example of that is a village that we saw in Denmark that was incredible. All the houses were built with non-toxic materials, and this particular house had its foundation made of spent oyster shells, and it actually worked better than concrete. So we saw these 3 principles, basically. Number 1, use less material, create less waste. Number 2, work with nature, use less energy. And number 3, use materials with less toxicity. Very simple principles that we wanted to apply to our renovation so that we could have independence, but also being trained as an economist, I saw that these societies got more independence and resilience from doing these things. And an interesting thing also happens. They're able to be more efficient and can produce things at less cost. So you end up with a strategic advantage as a society if you can actually do these things. What we wanted to do, 3 principles, standard construction, off-the-shelf technology to make it less expensive and actually more healthy to do the renovation. And so we got excited about this idea, and we used a program called Google SketchUp. I'm a Luddite and I could actually do this, but we actually took our building, our old house, and we modeled it up with a second floor and an overhang that replicated that cave, right? So we were trying to figure out, could we actually see if we could make these principles work? As you can see in the series here, which represents the summertime in June, that overhang gives our building a giant like umbrella effect, keeping it cool in the summer. And then in the wintertime, you can see that the low sun coming into the building will actually heat the building, keeping the amount of energy needed to heat that building in the winter down very low. Then it was time to really take these concepts to the professionals, right? The architects, engineers, and contractors who could actually help us apply these 3 principles. What did they say? Absolutely. They said it's impossible, right? This is not the way it's normally done. And they said it's going to be more expensive to do it that way. They said to us that it was less expensive to scrape the whole building and throw it into a dumpster. I grew up poor, and we didn't waste anything. Okay? That, in combination with my travel experiences, really said to me that this doesn't make any sense. And that little voice was screaming at me at this point. I understood, though, because I work with these professionals all the time. It was their trade perspective that was their religion. And anyone who's ever gotten into a conversation about religion knows that there's no winning and there's no losing. So we realized they were stuck and somebody had to do something different. So we hired the greenest architect we could possibly find. And he said that he would try to do what we're doing and keep it within a reasonable budget. We worked with him for 6 months. And in that 6 months, he told us it's going to be 3 times more expensive than standard construction to do what you're attempting to do. And not only that, he told us that overhang doesn't match my aesthetic. That's going to have to go. And so I stopped and I said, wait, as we discussed, right, those 3 principles should keep the cost down. And that overhang should keep the building cool in the summertime, right? And it should keep it warmer in the winter, saving a lot of energy over the course of the lifetime of the building. And so what did he say to me? He said, who are you to tell me how to design and build a building? Well, it stopped me in my tracks. I had to think. I've been racing all this way, and I had to stop and push back in my chair, and I say, who am I? Who am I? I'm not an architect. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a contractor. I'm a business consultant. So I came back with the only thing that I knew, which was, I'm the client. I'm the one who has to live in this building, and I'm the one paying your bill. To that, he retorted, well, I never wanted to be the green architect anyway. I think it's a bunch of bull. So we had to show him to the door, and after all that, Monica and I thought about this situation, and we said, is this all too difficult? What are we going to do from here? Should we just switch out the carpets, change out a couple of windows, and find an office outside of the home? It became a real conversation for us as to what to do next, and I thought about what it is that I do, and I coach leaders on innovation and strategy. And so the natural question came up because I talk these leaders out of very dark places that looked very similar to me from that perspective, right? I was in one of those dark places. And so I thought, can I actually practice what I preach? Or do we go back to the status quo? Can I actually get us out of this black hole and do something generative from this space? And at the same time we were thinking about that, the Public Utilities Commission had these big goals that all new construction would be net zero energy by 2020. All new residences would be net zero energy. That is, that they would harvest as much energy as they used on an annualized basis. And at that point, it was 2009. How are we ever going to get there, right? If somebody doesn't step up and build a demonstrator that actually works. So we kind of got inspired by that, but the risks to this whole thing were enormous. We couldn't find a model out there of a house that was actually this net zero energy and zero carbon. We also wanted to make sure it was standard construction, so it wasn't crazy. You didn't walk into something that looked like a mud hut. And we wanted to make sure that these were off-the-shelf technology so that they weren't crazy to maintain or super expensive to install. We wanted to make sure it worked, and we wanted to make sure it cost less. And so that's a very, very high standard, and we just hadn't seen it. Also, the other risk for us was failure. For me personally, this is the one that scared me. Because my clients value my process and my opinion and what I do as a consultant is dear to them. What happens if I tried this and it failed? That leaves me in an incredibly vulnerable position. So with all that, Monica and I had a conversation, and Monica said to me, if the next generation doesn't understand how to use their creativity and innovation in a really generative way going forward, what are we left with? And if we're not the role models for that, who's going to be? Who's going to step forward and actually get this done if we don't do it? And she said, Robert, you're the guy who solves problems for a living. You're the guy who works with somewhat intractable people who want to do very specific things. And you are successful with them because you're more persistent and you think differently than they do. How do I argue that? There's no argument, right? She was absolutely right. So what we did was we created a mission that in the process of renovating our house, we create a community around the idea that anyone can affordably build with energy efficiency and sustainability in mind. We reached out, and the response was incredible. First person who responded was Densi, our community connector. And he helped me set up a series of brainstorming events and unbelievable groundbreaking where the community came out in force. And that helped us to connect with people who were related to the materials that we were talking about. So Arthur is a reuse expert, and he helped us salvage the old building, saving us $40,000 and at the same time keeping 97.5% of the demolition waste out of the landfill. Thank you. Applaud yourselves. Applaud yourselves. It's incredible what is possible. And Wes is a contractor who helped us figure out how to put more insulation in the walls and seal the crawl space so that the building actually cost less and at the same time was more comfortable. Jonathan works with the electrical utility and did the modeling to make sure these crazy ideas that we had, very simple ideas, actually worked. Kent is a mechanical engineer, and this is actually our building on Prospect Avenue. Thank you. And you can see that in the summertime, it absolutely shades the building. That overhang works, right? And he built a thermal chimney in there that evacuates the heat for free. Gary built a heating system that is actually half the cost and 3 times the efficiency. Charisse made sure, and that's the living room and dining room of our house, that there was absolutely no light that needed to be turned on if the sun is out, and made sure that in the evening there was no can light so it radiates light beautifully. And made sure that the toxicity was eliminated from the paints and adhesives. So the heroes of the story are many, but obviously my co-conspirators in this life-hacking adventure are my son Carter and my wife Monica. And in the end, we created a process that got 70 collaborators, public and private institutions involved in this process. We had over 5,000 people through the building. We continued the outreach, and we were featured in 40 magazines and publications, as well as a documentary. The Green Idea House website is up and running as a free resource. And in the end, our vision, the 3 principles, and the building of community allowed us to do something that was said to be impossible. This building harvests much more energy than it uses. It does it with no maintenance, and it does it with standard construction materials and off-the-shelf technologies for less than standard cost. By the numbers, we reduced overall energy load by over 70%. You can see what our energy bill looks like. We overproduced by 2.71 megawatts and got a credit of $1,400. Our electric car is driven off of the solar panels from our roof, and we use it for 80% of our driving, and it's included in our electric bill, so we no longer pay gasoline charges. We reduced the soot by 100% coming off of our house and cars, and we capped off the gas line. We reduced our overall cost by 15% on the total construction and kept 97.5% of the demo waste out of the landfill, and reduced water consumption by 33%. And as a result of that, we won the Green Leadership Award for all of Los Angeles County. But believe it or not, that's not the best part. The best part is belonging to this community. This community that came out to support an impossible idea and challenged authority and challenged me to do what they said was impossible and make it possible. And I'm convinced that all of you will take this idea, make it better, and bring it forward and scale this idea, because it's about you at the end of the day and what's possible for you. Because you in this audience are the creators. You in this audience are the innovators. And the next time you have a big idea and someone says to you that's absolutely not possible, I want you to refer back to your little voice. Think about that little voice and make sure that you do what you need to do, set your vision, build your community, do the work, and when you're done, you can tell them what's actually possible. Thank you.